There were a tremendous number of watchdogs who were asleep at the switch, and some in fact were lapdogs, really, for the people that they were supposed to be overseeing. I would start with the Fed, the Federal Reserve Board. They were absolutely in the bank's corner on many occasions when there were discussions about very important topics such as how much capital banks should be required to have. They also really dragged their feet on, reining in questionable mortgage lending. And because the Fed is sort of the most esteemed of the regulators, they could have taken a leadership role, and they just did not. But there were also real problems at the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. There were tremendous failures at the other bank regulators and even some state regulators. Sadly, when a certain number of aggressive state regulators tried to go after questionable mortgage practices, they were shut down by federal regulators. So it was a really very broad failure, a broad regulatory failure for many, many years, and now we're paying the price. It was obvious that lending standards were declining. Obvious that you had really toxic loans that really people were going to have trouble repaying. There really didn't seem to be any interest in whether or not the person would be able to repay the loan. These were the loans that were sort of called the affordability products, and they were designed to help first-time homeowners buy into the American dream, but unfortunately it became the nightmare of foreclosure. Why they did not rein in some of these practices, why the regulators didn't put a stop to some of the shadowy mortgage lending practices is a really big question. That there is a revolving door problem in Washington, between Washington and Wall Street. There is something of a pipeline. There is also a mindset among regulators. They're often so closely allied with the people that they're regulating, the entities that they're regulating, that what happens is something called regulatory capture. They do not put themselves in an adversarial position. They don't really test the tenets of the regulated entities. They sort of go along with what they want in the belief that it's good for business, good for America, and ultimately that proved not to be the case. So unfortunately, you do have this very close alliance between the regulators and the entities they're overseeing and charged with overseeing. And then when you layer onto that the revolving door, where many of the people go back and forth between Wall Street and Washington, that just makes the problem even more pernicious. Unfortunately, I believe that the Dodd-Frank law, which was put in place to try to prevent this kind of mess, debacle, disaster from happening again, is simply not enough. It did nothing about reining in or cutting down to size the too big to fail banks. And as a result, they are bigger than ever, and they are even more poised to be rescued if they get into trouble. And so, in fact, you've exacerbated the problem, because in the after effects of the crisis, there was a lot of consolidation where a lot of smaller banks became part of bigger banks. They're now bigger than ever, and if they do get into trouble, the taxpayer will once again have to bail them out. I think the problem is a regulatory problem first, but then secondarily, you really need to have prosecutors who are willing to make cases and bring cases and hold people accountable. Because if you don't, then you start to have this sense among the population that there are two sets of rules. That there's one rule for the person who robs a loaf of bread from the deli, and there's another rule for the person who robs billions of dollars from a bank or an investor. That's a very dangerous position for this country to be in. It's a very dangerous view for Americans to believe in. So I think we have to have not only strong regulations and regulators who are willing and have the appetite to enforce them. But you also have to have prosecutors who are willing to go out and hold people accountable.